The sun had barely set, casting a golden glow over the sprawling mansion at the edge of the city. Inside, the opulence was almost overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain, and marble floors gleamed under the soft, ambient lighting. This was the home of Jonathan Whitman, a millionaire known for his philanthropic efforts, but equally infamous for his detached demeanor and preference for solitude. Tonight, however, his fortress-like estate wasn't as impenetrable as it seemed. Outside, in the gathering shadows, a plan was unfolding, one fueled by greed and a dangerous underestimation of who might be watching. Across the street, in the dimly lit corner of a neighborhood diner, Leather Black nursed a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Dressed in an unassuming leather jacket and worn jeans, he blended seamlessly into the background, a shadow in a world that seldom paid him attention anymore. But Leather was no ordinary man. Once a highly trained operative in the Special Forces, his life had been a whirlwind of high-stakes missions and calculated risks. Now retired, he had traded covert operations for a quiet existence in this sleepy part of town. Yet old habits die hard, and tonight, his sharp eyes caught something others might have missed. It started with a black van parked just a little too perfectly along the curb, its engine humming softly as though waiting for something or someone. A group of men, dressed in dark clothing, loitered nearby, their movements precise and their conversations terse. Leather's instincts, honed by years of dangerous encounters, kicked in immediately. Something wasn't right. From his seat by the window, Leather's gaze tracked the men as they moved closer to the mansion's perimeter, their gestures signaling coordination. One of them carried a crowbar, another held a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and the rest followed like wolves circling their prey. It wasn't long before they disappeared from view, slipping into the shadows surrounding Whitman's property. Leather felt a flicker of unease. He didn't know Whitman personally, but he had heard enough about the reclusive millionaire to piece together who lived behind those gates. Part of him wanted to shrug it off. It wasn't his business, and getting involved often led to more trouble than it was worth. But another part, the part that had made him one of the most dependable soldiers in his unit, wouldn't let it go. Finishing his coffee, Leather stood and adjusted his jacket. He stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against his face as he leaned against the hood of his car, watching the mansion intently. Minutes ticked by, and the faint sound of breaking glass reached his ears, followed by the muted thud of something heavy falling. His jaw tightened. He didn't need to see to know what was happening, a break-in. Inside the mansion, the gang moved quickly, their boots silent against the polished floors. They worked like a well-oiled machine, disabling alarms and sweeping through the rooms in search of valuables. But what they didn't know was that the house wasn't empty. Whitman, oblivious to the impending danger, was in his study on the second floor, engrossed in paperwork. The faint sounds of intruders hadn't yet pierced the bubble of his concentration. Outside, Leather's pulse quickened. He could call the police, let them handle it. But he knew from experience how slow the response could be in this part of town. By the time help arrived, it might be too late. No, he couldn't just stand by and watch. Old instincts and training kicked in as he made his decision. Reaching into his car, he grabbed a flashlight and a compact toolkit he always kept on hand, remnants of his past life. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for certain. Those men had made a grave mistake choosing this night and this target. As Leather moved closer to the mansion, staying in the shadows, a faint flicker of light caught his attention through one of the ground floor windows. Inside, the gang was becoming bolder, rummaging through drawers and cabinets, their low voices betraying a growing confidence. They thought they were unstoppable, invincible even. What they didn't realize was that their every move was now being watched by someone far more dangerous than they could imagine. And then, just as Leather reached the edge of the property, a loud crash shattered the relative quiet. One of the men had accidentally knocked over a decorative vase, the sound echoing through the house like a warning bell. Upstairs, Whitman froze, his head snapping toward the noise. And outside, Leather's eyes narrowed. The game was about to change. The gang, still unaware of Whitman's presence, or Leather's, continued their raid, blissfully ignorant of the storm brewing just beyond their sight. As Leather moved closer, the weight of his decision settled over him. This wasn't just about protecting a wealthy man's fortune. This was about something deeper, a sense of duty that never truly left him, even after the uniform came off. In the silence of the night, a predator stalked its prey. But for the first time, the predators weren't the ones holding the power. Leather Black was watching, and soon, they'd learn just how dangerous it could be to underestimate the wrong man. Leather crouched low as he moved closer to the mansion, his footsteps silent on the damp grass. Years of training had taught him how to make himself nearly invisible, a shadow that blended seamlessly into the night. He could hear the faint murmurs of the gang inside, their voices sharp and hurried as they tore through Whitman's home. He kept his breathing steady, his mind calculating. Rushing in without a plan would be reckless, but waiting too long could cost lives. He paused near a side window, the faint glow of light spilling onto the lawn. Peering inside, he could see two of the intruders rifling through drawers in what looked like a dining room. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, muttered something about finding the safe. The other, shorter and stockier, laughed quietly as he pocketed a handful of silverware. They moved with the confidence of men who thought no one was watching, their arrogance blinding them to the danger they were in. Leather's thoughts briefly flickered to Whitman. He had heard the stories, how the millionaire had amassed his fortune through savvy investments and a bit of luck. There were rumors about his reclusive nature, whispers of a man haunted by something in his past. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that Whitman was upstairs, likely unaware that danger had already breached his sanctuary. The sharp snap of breaking glass pulled Leather's focus back to the scene in front of him. Another man had joined the group in the dining room, holding what looked like an expensive vase. He smashed it against the edge of the table, the shards scattering across the floor like glittering stars. Leather's jaw tightened. These weren't just thieves, they were vandals, reveling in the destruction of someone else's life. He stepped back from the window, his mind racing. He needed to act soon, but he couldn't afford to be reckless. He scanned the perimeter, his sharp eyes searching for an entry point. A side door, partially obscured by overgrown hedges, caught his attention. Moving quickly, he crossed the yard and tested the handle. It was locked, but that didn't stop him. Pulling a small tool from his pocket, he worked the mechanism with practiced ease. Within seconds, the door clicked open. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The faint smell of expensive wood polish mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline as Leather stepped into a dimly lit hallway. He could hear the men's voices clearer now, their words cutting through the stillness like knives. They were arguing about something, possibly where to search next. He moved carefully, his steps muffled by the plush carpet beneath his feet. As he crept closer to the source of the noise, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a gilded mirror hanging on the wall. For a moment, he barely recognized the man staring back at him. The lines on his face seemed deeper, his eyes harder. Retirement was supposed to have softened him, but tonight, the soldier in him had come roaring back to life. He reached the edge of the dining room and pressed himself against the wall, listening intently. There were at least 4 of them, maybe 5. They were splitting up now, their voices growing fainter as they moved deeper into the house. Leather's pulse quickened. He knew he couldn't take them all at once, not without risking Whitman's safety. He needed to be smart, to pick them off one by one if necessary. Just as he was about to move, a faint creak echoed from the staircase at the far end of the hall. Leather froze, his senses on high alert. A shadow moved across the landing above. Whitman. The man had finally realized something was wrong. Leather silently cursed. If Whitman made his presence known, the gang would turn their attention to him, and the situation could spiral out of control. Leather made a snap decision. He stepped into the dining room, his presence startling the 2 men still rummaging through drawers. For a brief moment, there was silence, the kind that stretched thin and heavy. Then one of the men lunged at him, his hand reaching for something. Maybe a weapon, maybe not. Leather didn't wait to find out. His training took over, and with a swift, precise movement, he deflected the attack and sent the man sprawling to the floor. The other man hesitated, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice shaky. Leather didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his imposing presence enough to make the man take a step back. "You don't want to do this," Leather said, his tone calm but firm. "Leave now, and this doesn't have to get worse." The man glanced at his fallen companion, then at the doorway behind Leather. For a moment, it seemed like he might take the offer, but the sound of approaching footsteps from the hallway changed his mind. Reinforcements were coming. Leather backed away, retreating into the shadows as two more men entered the room. They were larger than the first two, their movements confident and aggressive. One of them carried a crowbar, the other a knife. Leather's mind raced. He was outnumbered, and while his skills gave him an edge, he couldn't afford to underestimate them. As the men fanned out, searching for him in the dim light, Leather slipped out of the room and back into the hallway. He needed to regroup, to come up with a new plan, but as he moved, a faint sound from upstairs stopped him in his tracks. It was Whitman, his voice low and urgent, speaking into a phone. "There are people in the house," he was saying. "I need help. Please send someone now." Leather felt a surge of relief. At least Whitman was aware of the danger, but he also knew the man's call for help might not reach anyone in time. The gang was too organized, too efficient. They had likely planned for a fast escape, and if they realized Whitman was upstairs, they might decide to silence him before leaving. He glanced back toward the dining room, where the gang members were still searching for him. Time was running out. He needed to keep them distracted, to buy enough time for Whitman to either escape or for the authorities to arrive. Taking a deep breath, Leather stepped into the open, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Looking for me?" he said, his tone calm but laced with an unmistakable edge. The men turned, their expressions a mix of anger and surprise. For a moment, no one moved. Then, like a coiled spring, the tension snapped, and chaos erupted once more. The moment Leather stepped into the open, the tension in the room escalated. The two men with weapons didn't hesitate. They lunged at him with a speed that was almost too quick to track. Leather's training kicked in, his body reacting instinctively. He sidestepped the man with the crowbar, letting the weapon swing past him and crash into the wall. Before the man could recover, Leather was on him, twisting the crowbar from his grip and sending him crashing to the floor with a sickening thud. The second man, the one with the knife, didn't waste any time either. He slashed at Leather with a wild, angry movement, but Leather was already moving, his body fluid and precise. A hard parry with his forearm deflected the blade, sending a sharp sting up his arm. But he didn't flinch. With a quick motion, Leather grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it with enough force to make him drop the knife. In a fluid motion, Leather slammed the man's head into the wooden floor, knocking him unconscious. For a moment, it was quiet. Leather stood in the middle of the hallway, panting slightly, his eyes scanning the now stunned men. They were no longer the confident intruders they had been moments ago. They were scared, confused, and desperate to regroup. But Leather wasn't about to give them that opportunity. He heard the sound of footsteps approaching, more of them. The gang was getting smarter, spreading out and closing in on him. Leather could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had taken down two of them, but the others weren't far behind, and he couldn't afford to let them corner him. The odds were still stacked against him, and every move he made had to count. He retreated into a darkened hallway, stepping carefully so as not to make a sound. His senses were heightened, his mind racing as he formulated his next move. He couldn't let these men get away with what they were doing, and he certainly couldn't let them hurt Whitman. The man had no idea what kind of danger he was in, but Leather did. These weren't just common thieves. There was something about their precision, their coordination, that told him they were more than just amateurs. They were professionals, hired for a job, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they came for. Upstairs, Whitman's voice trembled as he spoke into the phone again. "Please, I need help. I don't know how long I can stay hidden." Leather's eyes narrowed as he listened to the desperation in Whitman's voice. The millionaire was scared, and for good reason. Every minute that passed, the situation grew more dangerous. Leather knew he had to act fast. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the gang were closing in. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard, reached the corner of the hallway where Leather had been moments earlier. His eyes scanned the area, his hand resting on the grip of a gun. The man was focused, calculating, and Leather knew he would be a formidable opponent. But Leather wasn't going to give him the chance to take the first shot. From his position in the shadows, Leather could hear the man muttering to himself, trying to piece together what had just happened. "Where did he go?" the man hissed. "There's no way he got past us." Leather's heart pounded in his chest. The man was close now, just a few feet away. If Leather made a sound, the entire situation would change. But if he didn't act soon, he risked being trapped. The game of cat and mouse could only go on for so long. He waited, patience and calm settling over him like a familiar cloak. The man took another step forward, the sound of his boots creaking on the floor. Leather tensed, his muscles coiling like a spring. And then, just as the man's back was to him, Leather struck. A swift, calculated blow to the back of his head sent the man crumpling to the ground before he could even react. Leather didn't pause to admire his work. There was no time. He knew the remaining men would be on him soon. His eyes flicked to the staircase that led up to where Whitman was hiding. He couldn't let them corner the millionaire. But he also couldn't leave the gang unchallenged. It was a delicate balance, one that required careful planning, and Leather's mind raced to find the right move. As he moved toward the stairs, a sudden noise from behind made him freeze. The door at the end of the hallway creaked open, and another figure appeared. This time, it was a woman. She was tall, with short black hair and a scar running down the side of her face. She held a gun in her hand, and her eyes were narrowed with the kind of focus that Leather recognized all too well. This was no ordinary thief. Her gaze swept across the hallway, landing on the bodies of her fallen comrades. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a cold determination. She wasn't scared. She was calculating, and she was ready for a fight. Leather's grip tightened on the edge of the railing as he assessed the situation. He was outnumbered again, and this woman, whoever she was no rookie. She had the look of someone who had been in these situations before, someone who knew how to handle herself under pressure. Leather had no doubt that she was as dangerous as the others, if not more so. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the distant hum of the house's air conditioning and their own breathing. The woman's eyes flicked over to the stairs, and Leather knew she had spotted Whitman's hiding place. That was all he needed. She was going for the kill. Before she could make a move, Leather took a step forward, his voice low but filled with authority. "You don't want to do this," he said. "This isn't your fight." The woman's lips curled into a smirk. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" she replied, her voice smooth but laced with an edge of menace. "You're in the wrong place at the wrong time." Leather's eyes narrowed. He wasn't about to back down, not now. He'd been in worse situations before, and this woman wasn't going to intimidate him. But there was something unsettling about her calmness, the way she moved with such ease. This wasn't a random break-in. There was something personal behind it, something much deeper than simple robbery. The realization hit Leather like a cold wave. These weren't just thieves trying to make a quick buck. This was a planned hit, and Whitman was the target. But why? And who was pulling the strings? Leather didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He had to stop this before it went any further. He couldn't let this woman, or anyone else, get to Whitman, not if he could help it. The woman's finger tightened on the trigger, and Leather braced himself for the inevitable. The standoff between them felt like it lasted an eternity, but in reality, it was only a matter of seconds before one of them made a move.